Hello, everyone. Good evening and happy Story Time Tuesday. That's right, it's another Tuesday. It's another opportunity for you to sit there, put your feet up, snuggle back in a chair with a blanket, maybe get yourself a cup of hot cocoa or some comforting beverage, and just relax. Will I bring you a story? This week, we'll continue into A Spell for Chameleon. We have made it through 11 chapters so far, all of which are, of course, available on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/at Sir Arminius. You are welcome to go check out any of those replays. Of course, the chapters from this evening will be on the YouTube channel as well once this broadcast evening has been completed. We'll probably do 2 chapters tonight, I think. We'll see how the night is faring for us. But let's talk a little bit about what happened last time. So, last time around, on the last stream, last week, Bink and Fanchon started to get an uneasy trust for each other. Well, Bink started to get an uneasy trust for Fanchon. Fanchon seemed to trust Bink. And they were thrown in the pit together. She started to make a plan to be able to escape from the pit by making bricks to help them to get out. The evil magician Trent showed his power by turning them into a basilisk and darned if I can't remember the other name, but basically the same thing as a basilisk. The males and female forms of them, and then turning them back, freaking them the hell out, and threatening to put them like that permanently if they did not give them him the information that they wanted. So that evening, they effected their escape from the pit that they had been thrown into, and they made their way out to the boat where the magic nullification potion was thought to be, the boat out in the harbor that had the catapult on it, to be able to launch it onto the stone within Xanth. And they captured the boat. Neither of them knew how to sail the boat. The boat started to make its way, when they pulled up the anchor, towards the shield, which would have effectively obliterated all life forms upon the boat. They ended up jumping off of the boat, getting into a rowboat, because Bink could control the rowboat. Ended up crashing the rowboat onto some rocks in the bay. And then getting pulled down through a whirlpool along with the evil magician Trent, and pulled through the whirlpool by some kraken weed back into the magical land of Xanth. An unorthodox way to make it back in through the shield wall, but hey, it worked. They made an uneasy truce with each other to escape from the underground. He transformed them into several things to be able to help them to get out. A giant sea turtle, I think, was really the thing that he transformed them into. They managed to make it out from underneath the water. They didn't trust him, so they decided to go their own ways. All three of them managed to get caught in various magical traps throughout the land. Yay for them. Bink was the first one to manage to escape. He could not free Fanchon on his own. He went looking for the evil magician. He helped to free the evil magician from a magic gourd that he was staring into. The evil magician then helped to free Fanchon, and they all agreed they were better off with their truce than they were all by their lonelies. As if they continued to be all by themselves, they were not going to make it out of the wilderness alive. And so that brings us to where we are now. Of course, all that additional detail available through the recordings that you can go and listen to. So now we'll go ahead and sit back. I'll go ahead and sit back as well. And we'll get started into chapter 12. And, we'll go ahead and get into our evening. Well, hello, my friend Cajun Tuna. Hey, my friend, you may notice next to your name, I've added a little extra special thing. You have been here long enough and participated long enough to earn your extra little token. Congratulations. And of course, thank you for your continued support of this channel. And by virtue of supporting this channel, supporting Project New Hope. Very much appreciated. So I hope you enjoy your new little thing next to your name. Not just the thing for being a subscriber, but the thing for being the awesome you that you are. All right, everybody. Sit back, relax, cuddle up, and prepare to enjoy as we start in. Chapter 12, Chameleon. The first thing Fanchon did when she recovered was fetch the magic gourd Bink had told her about. "This could be useful," she said, wrapping it in a great leaf from a blanket plant. "Now, we must plan the best route out of here," Trent said. "I believe we are south of the chasm, so that will balk us if we go north, unless we remain on the coast. I don't think that is wise." Bink remembered his experience crossing the chasm at the other side. "No, we don't want to stay on the beach," he agreed. The sorceress Iris had complicated things there, but there could be equivalent menaces here. "Our alternative is to cut inland," Trent said. "I am not familiar with this specific locale, but I believe Humphrey was building a castle due east of here." "He completed it," Fanchon said. "Fine," Bink said. "You can change us into big birds, maybe rocks, and we'll carry you there." Trent shook his head negatively. "This is not feasible." "But you changed us before, and we helped you. We made the truce. We wouldn't drop you." Trent smiled. "It is not a question of trust, Bink. I trust you. I have no question at all about your basic integrity, or Fanchon's. But we are in a peculiar circumstance." "Fancy the evil magician paying a call on the good magician," Fanchon said. "What A scene that would make. No, you would be disappointed, Trent said. Humphrey and I have always gotten along well. We leave each other alone professionally. I should be happy to meet him again. But he would be obliged to convey the news of my return to Xanth to the king. And once he knew my general whereabouts, he would use his magic to keep track of me. Yes, I see the problem, she said. No sense tipping your hand to the enemy, but we could fly you somewhere else. We can fly nowhere, Trent insisted. I cannot afford to advertise my presence in Xanth, and neither can you. That's right, Pink agreed. We're exiles. And the penalty for violating exile is death, Fanchon finished. I never thought. We're all in trouble. If you had forgotten such details 2 days ago, Trent observed dryly, we would not be here now. Fanchon looked unusually somber, as if there were some special significance to the remark. Oddly, the expression made her look less ugly than usual. Probably, Pink thought, he was merely getting used to her. What are we going to do? Pink asked. The whirlpool brought us in under the shield. We've already agreed we can't go back that way. We can't stay here on the beach, and we can't let the citizens know we're back, even though we entered only by freak accident. We'll have to conceal our identities, Fanchon decided. There are places in Xanth where we would be unknown. That doesn't sound like much of a life, Pink said. Always in hiding. And if anyone asked Magician Humphrey where we were... Who'd do that? Fanchon demanded. 1 year's service, just to check up on someone in exile? That is our only present margin of security, Trent said. The fact that Humphrey will not bother to check without a potential fee. However, we can worry about such things after we escape the wilderness. Perhaps by some new avenues will have appeared. I can change you into unrecognizable forms, if necessary, and camouflage myself. It may all prove to be academic. Because they might never make it through the wilderness, Pink thought. They traveled along the beach until they found a region of sparse forest and field that seemed less hazardous than the rest. They spaced themselves out somewhat whenever anything dangerous appeared, so that they would not all be caught together. The selection worked well enough. At first, the magic they encountered was largely innocuous, as if the concentration were all at the beach. There were spells designed to make passing animals sheer off, or color shows whose purpose was unclear. Bink had been through worse on his trip to the Good Magician's castle. Maybe the wilderness was overrated. Fanchon spotted a fabric plant and efficiently fashioned togas for them all. The men tolerated this with good humor, having become accustomed to nudity. Had Fanchon been a provocatively proportioned woman, there might have been more reason, and less desire for bodily concealment. Still, Bink remembered how she had professed modesty in the prison pit so as to gain a private section in which to hide the bricks. She probably had her reasons this time, too. There were several patches of spellcast coldness, and one of heat. The clothing would have helped protect against these, but they were easy to avoid. The assorted carnivorous trees were readily spotted and bypassed. Staying off attractive paths was second nature to them all now. One region was distinctly awkward, however. It was dry and sandy, with little apparent nutrient in the soil. Yet it was covered by luxuriant, waist-high, broad-leaved plants. The region seemed harmless, so they strode straight through the center. Then, all three travelers felt a sudden and almost uncontrollable call of nature. They had to scatter, barely getting separated in time to perform. These were very practical plants, Bink abruptly realized. Their spells compelled passing animals to deposit nutritious fluids and solids on the ground, greatly promoting plant growth. Fertilizer magic. Farther along, one animal neither fled their approach nor acted hostile. This was a knee-high, snuffling quadruped with a greatly extended snout. Trent drew his sword as it ambled toward them, but Fanchon stopped him. "I recognize that one," she said. "It's a magic sniffer." "It smells magic?" Bink asked. "It smells magic," she said. "We used to use one on my folks' farm, to sniff out magic herbs and things. The stronger the magic, the more it reacts. But it's harmless." "What does it feed on?" Trent asked, keeping his hand on his sword. "Magic berries. Other magic doesn't seem to affect it one way or the other. It's just curious. It doesn't differentiate by type of spell, just intensity." They stood and watched. Fanchon was nearest to the sniffer, so it approached her first. It snorted, making a flute-like sound. "See, I have some magic. It likes me," she said. What magic? Bink wondered. She had never shown any talent, and never actually told him what she could do. There was still too much he did not know about her. Satisfied, the sniffer moved on to Trent. This time, its reaction was much stronger. It danced around, emitting a medley of notes. "Sure enough," Trent said, with a certain justified pride. "It knows a magician when it smells one." Then it came to Bink, and frisked almost as much as it had for Trent. "So much for perception," Bink said, laughing with embarrassment. But Trent did not laugh. "It believes you are almost as strong a magician as I am," he said, his fingers tapping his sword with unconscious significance. Then he caught himself, and seemed to be at ease again. "I wish I were," Bink said. "But I was banished for lack of magic." Yet the magician Humphrey had told him he had very strong magic that could not be brought out. Now his curiosity and frustration were increased by this happenstance. What kind of a talent could he have that hid itself so determinedly? Or was it hidden by some outside spell? They trudged on. They cut poles with which to poke the ground ahead for invisible barriers and pitfalls, and other suspiciously unsuspect aspects of the wild. This made progress slow, but they dared not hurry. Actually, they had no reason to hurry. Their only purposes were concealment and survival. Food turned out to be no problem. They did not trust the various fruit and candy trees they saw. Some might be magic and serve the interests of their hosts rather than the interests of the consumers, though they looked similar to crop trees. But Trent merely turned a hostile thistle tree into a luxuriant multi-fruit tree, and they feasted on apples, pears, bananas, blackberries, and tomatoes. It reminded Bink how great was the power of a true magician, for Trent's talent really embraced that of food conjuration as a mere sub-talent. Properly exploited, the reach of his magic was enormous. But they were still heading into the wilderness, not out of it. Illusions became bolder, more persistent, and harder to penetrate. There were more sounds, louder, more ominous. Now and then the ground shuddered, and there were great, not too distant bellowings. Trees leaned toward them, leaves twitching. "I think," Fanchon said, "we have not begun to appreciate the potency of this forest. Its whole innocuous permeability may have been merely to encourage us to get more deeply in." Bink, looking nervously about, agreed. "We picked the safest seeming route. Maybe that's where we went wrong. We should have taken the most threatening one and gotten consumed by a tangle tree," Fanchon said. "Let's try going back," Bink suggested. Seeing their doubt, he added, "just to test it." They tried it. Almost immediately, the forest darkened and tightened. More trees appeared, blocking the way they had come. Were they illusions? Or had they been invisible before? Bink was reminded of the one-way path he had walked from the good magician's castle. But this was more ominous. These were not nice trees. They were gnarled colossi bearing thorns and twitching vines. Branches crisscrossed one another, leaves sprouting to form new barriers even as the trio watched. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "No doubt about it," Trent said. "We failed to see the forest or the trees. I could transform any in our direct path, but if some started firing thorns at us, we would be in trouble regardless." "Even if we wanted to go that way," Fanchon said, looking west, "we'd never have time to retrace it all through that resistance. Not before night." Night. That was the worst time for hostile magic. "But the alternative is to go the way it wants us to go," Bink said, alarmed. "That may be easy now, but it surely is not our best choice." "Perhaps the wilderness does not know us well enough," Trent said with a grim smile. I do feel competent to handle most threats, so long as someone watches behind me and stands guard while I sleep. Bink thought of the magician's powers of magic and swordplay, and had to agree. The forest might be one giant spider web, but that spider might become a gnat unexpectedly. Maybe we should gamble that we can handle it, Bink said. At least we'll find out what it is. For the first time, he was glad to have the evil magician along. Yes, there is always that, Fanchon agreed sourly. Now that they had made the decision, progress became easier. The threatenings of the forest remained, but they assumed the aspect of background warnings. As dusk came, the way opened out into a clearing, within which stood an old, run-down stone fortress. "Oh, no!" Fanchon exclaimed. "Not a haunted castle!" Thunder cracked behind them. A chill wind came up, cutting through their tunics. Bink shivered. "I think we spend the night there. Or in the rain," he said. "Could you transform it into a harmless cottage?" "My talent applies only to living things," Brent said. "That excludes buildings and storms." Glowing eyes appeared in the forest behind them. "If those things rush us," Fanchon said, "you could only transform a couple before they were on us, since you can't zap them from a distance." "And not at night," Brent said. "Remember, I have to see my subject too. All things considered, I think we had better oblige the local powers that be and enter the castle carefully. And once inside, we should sleep in shifts. It is likely to be a difficult night." Bink shuddered. The last place he wanted to spend the night was there. But he realized they had come far too deeply into the trap to extricate themselves readily. There was powerful magic here, the magic of an entire region. Too much to fight directly, now. So, they yielded, goaded by the looming storm. The ramparts were tall, but covered by moss and clinging vines. The drawbridge was down, its once stout timbers rotting in place. Yet there was an ancient, lingering, rugged magnificence about it. "This castle has style," Brent observed. They tapped the planks, locating a reasonably solid section on which to cross. The moat was overgrown with weeds, and its water was stagnant. "Shame to see a good castle get run down," Brent said. "It is obviously deserted, and has been for decades." "Or centuries," Bink added. "Why would a forest herd us into a derelict edifice?" Fanchon asked. "Even if something really horrible lurks here, what would our deaths profit the forest? We were only passing through, and we would make it much faster if the forest just left us alone. We intended no harm." "There is always a rationale," Brent said. "Magic does not focus without purpose." They approached the front portcullis as the storm broke. That encouraged them to step inside, though the interior was almost black. "Maybe we can find a torch," Fanchon said. "Feel along the walls. Usually a castle will have something near the entrance." Crash! The raised portcullis, which they had assumed was corroded in place, crashed down behind them. The iron bars were far too heavy to lift. The three were trapped inside. "The jaws close," Trent remarked, not seeming perturbed. But Bink could see that his sword was in his hand. Fanchon made a half-muffled scream, clutching at Bink's arm. He looked ahead and saw a ghost. There was no question about it. The thing was a humped white sheet with dead black eye holes. It made a mouthless moan. Trent's sword whistled as he stepped forward. The blade sliced through the sheet, with no visible effect. The ghost floated away through a wall. "This castle is haunted, no question," Trent said, matter-of-factly. "If you believed that, you wouldn't be so calm," Fanchon said accusingly. "On the contrary, it is physical menaces I fear," Trent replied. "The thing to remember about ghosts is that they have no concrete manifestation, and lack also the ability of shades to animate living creatures. Therefore, they cannot directly affect ordinary people. They act only through the fear they inspire. So it is merely necessary to have no fear. In addition, this particular ghost was as surprised to see us as we were to see it. It was probably merely investigating the fall of the portcullis. It certainly meant no harm." It was obvious that Trent was not afraid. He had not used his sword in panic, but to verify that it was a genuine ghost he faced. This was courage of a type Bink had never had. He was shivering with fear and reaction. Fanchon had better control, now that her initial scream was out. "We could fall into quite physical pits, or set off more booby traps if we tried to explore this place in the dark. We're sheltered from the rain here. Why don't we sleep right here in shifts until morning?" "You have marvelous common sense, my dear," Trent said. "Shall we draw straws for first watch?" "I'll take it," Bink said. "I'm too scared to sleep anyway." "So am I," Fanchon said, and Bink felt warm gratitude for her admission. "I have not yet become blasé about ghosts." "There is not enough evil in you," Trent said, chuckling. "Very well. I shall be first to sleep." He moved, and Bink felt something cool touch his hand. "Do take my sword, Bink, and run it through whatever manifests. If it has no impact, relax, for it is a true ghost. If it contacts anything material, that threat will no doubt be abated by the thrust. Only take care," and Bink heard the smile in his voice, "that you do not strike the wrong subject." Bink found himself holding the heavy sword, amazed. "Do not be concerned about your inexperience with the weapon. A straight, Bold thrust will have authority regardless. Trent continued reassuringly. When your watch is done, pass the blade on to the lady. When she is done, I will take my turn, being by then well rested. Bink heard him lie down. Remember, the magician's voice came from the floor, my talent is void in the dark, since I cannot see my subject. So, do not wake me unnecessarily. We depend on your alertness and judgment. He said no more. Fanchon found Bink's free arm. Let me get behind you, she said. I don't want you running me through by accident. Bink was glad for her closeness. He stood peering about, sword in one sweaty hand, staff in the other, unable to penetrate the dark. The sound of the rain outside became loud. Then he made out Trent's gentle snoring. Bink? Fanchon said at last. What kind of man would give his enemy his sword and go to sleep? That question had been bothering Bink. He had no satisfactory answer. A man with iron nerve, he said at last, knowing that that could only be part of it. A man who extends such trust, she said thoughtfully, must expect to receive it. Well, if we're trustworthy, and he isn't, he knows he can trust us. It doesn't work that way, Bink. It is the untrustworthy man who distrusts others, because he judges them by himself. I don't see how a documented liar and villain and schemer for the throne like the evil magician can be this way. Maybe he's not the historical Trent, but someone else, an imposter. An imposter would still be a liar. But we've seen his power. Magic is never twice the same. He has to be Trent the Transformer. Yet something is wrong. Yes, something is right. That's what's wrong. He trusts us. He shouldn't. You could run him through right now while he sleeps. Even if you didn't kill him with the first thrust, he could not transform you in the dark. I wouldn't do that, Bink exclaimed, horrified. Precisely. You have honor. So do I. It is hard to avoid the conclusion that so does he. Yet we know he is the evil magician. He must have spoken the truth before, Bink decided. He can't make it through the wilderness alone, and he figures he'll need help to get out of this haunted castle in one piece. And he knows we can't get out alive either. So we're all on the same side and won't hurt each other. So he's serious about the truce. But what about when we get out of all this and the truce ends? Bink didn't answer. With that, they were silent. But his troubled thoughts continued. If they survived the night in this dread castle, they could probably survive the day. In the morning, Trent might figure the truce was over. Bink and Fanchon could guard the magician through the night, Then, in the morning, Trent could slay them both while they slept. If Trent had taken the first watch, he could not have done that, because he would have to slay the people who would protect him for the remainder of the evening. So it made sense to take the last watch. No, he was not ready to believe that. Bink himself had chosen the first watch. He had to have faith in the sanctity of the truce. If that faith was misplaced, then he was lost. But he would rather lose that way than to win through dishonor. That decision gave him comfort. Bink saw no more ghosts that night. At last, he gave the sword to Fanchon. To his surprise, he managed to sleep. He woke at dawn. Fanchon was asleep beside him, looking less ugly than he recalled. In fact, not really homely at all. He certainly was acclimatizing. Would it ever come to the point where Trent seemed noble and Fanchon beautiful? Good, Trent said. He was wearing his sword again. Now that you can look out for her, I'll have a look around the premises. He walked on down the dim hall. They had survived the night. Bink wasn't sure in retrospect whether he had been more worried about the ghosts or the magician. He still lacked comprehension of the motives of either. And Fanchon. As the light brightened, he was sure her appearance had improved. She could hardly be called lovely, but she certainly was not the ugly girl he had perceived when he met her 4 days ago. In fact, she now reminded him of someone. Dee! He exclaimed. She woke. Yes? Her response amazed him as much as a vague resemblance. He had called her Dee, but Dee was elsewhere in Xanth. Why, then, had she answered to that name as if it were her own? I just thought you... She sat up. You're right, of course, Bink. I knew I couldn't conceal it much longer. You mean you actually are? I am Chameleon, she said. Now he was totally confused. That was only a code word we used to alert. And an omen. I am Fanchon, ugly, she said. And Dee, average. And Wayne, beautiful. I change a little every day, completing the circle in the course of a month. A lunar month. It's the female cycle, you know. Now he remembered how Dee, too, had reminded him of someone. But Wayne was stupid. My intelligence varies inversely, she explained. That is the other facet of my curse. I range from ugly intelligence to lovely idiocy. I've been looking for a spell to turn me normal. A spell for Chameleon, he said musingly. What an astonishing enchantment! Yet it had to be true, for he had almost caught the similarity when he met Dee, so close to where he had lost Wayne. And now he had seen Fanchon change day by day. Chameleon. She had no magic talent. She was magic, like the centaurs or dragons. But why did you follow me into exile? Magic doesn't work outside Xanth. Humphrey told me I would gradually center on my normal state if I went to Mundania. I would be D permanently, completely average. That seemed my best choice. But you said you followed me. I did. You were kinda Wayne. My mind may change, but my memory doesn't. You saved her from the Gap Dragon at great peril to yourself. And you didn't take advantage of her when she... You know. Fink remembered the beautiful girl's willingness to disrobe. She had been too stupid to think through the likely consequence of her offer. But Dee, and Fanchon later, would have understood. And now I know you tried to help Dee also. I, shouldn't have cut you off then. But we weren't as smart then as later, and we didn't know you as well. She broke off. It doesn't matter. But it did matter. She was not one, but 3 of the girls he had known. And one of these was excruciatingly beautiful, but also stupid. How should he react to this chameleon? The concept of the chameleon again. The magic lizard that changed its shape and color at will, mimicking other creatures. If only he could forget that omen, or be sure he understood it. He was sure this chameleon meant him no harm, but she might in fact be the death of him. Her magic was involuntary, but it dominated her life. She had a problem, certainly, and so did he. So she had learned that he was to be exiled for lack of magic, and made her decision. D, without magic. Fink, without magic. 2 ordinary people with a common memory of the land of magic. Perhaps the only thing to sustain them in drear Mundania. No doubt her smart phase had figured that out. What an apt couple they could make, these 2 demagicked souls. So she had acted, but had had no way of knowing about the ambush set by the evil magician. It had been a good notion. Fink liked Dee. She was not so ugly as to turn him off, and not so lovely as to excite his distrust after his experiences with Sabrina and the sorceress Iris. What was the matter with beautiful women? That they could not be constant, but also not so stupid as to make it pointless. Just a reasonable compromise. An average girl he could have loved, especially in Mundania. But now, they were back in Xanth, and her curse was in force. She was not simple Dee, but complex chameleon, swinging from extreme to extreme, when all he wanted was the average. I'm not so stupid yet that I can't figure out what's going through your mind, she said. I'm better off in Mundania. Fink could not deny it. Now he almost wished it had worked out that way. To have settled down with Dee, raised a family, that could have been its own special brand of magic. There was a crash. Both reacted, orienting on the sound. It had come from somewhere above. Trent's in trouble. Bink said. He started down the hall, carrying his staff. Must be stairs somewhere. Behind his immediate consciousness, he realized that this reaction indicated a fundamental change in his attitude toward the magician. That night, the sword and the sleeping man, if evil was as evil did, Trent could not be very evil. Trust compelled trust. Maybe the magician was only trying to manipulate Bink's attitude. Regardless, that attitude had suffered a fundamental erosion. Chameleon followed. Now that it was light, they had no fear of pitfalls, though Bink knew there could be magic ones. There was a grandly curving stone staircase beyond a palatial room. They charged up this. Suddenly, a ghost loomed up. "Ooh," it moaned, its great eye holes staring like holes in a dark coffin. "Get out of my way," Bink snapped, swinging his pole at it. The ghost, nonplussed, phased out. Bink ran through its remnant, feeling the momentary chill of its presence. Trent was right. There was no need to fear the insubstantial. Every step he took was solid. Apparently, there were no illusions in this old castle, just its harmless resident spooks. That was a relief after the way they had been herded into it last night. But now, there was silence upstairs. Bink and Chameleon picked their way through surprisingly opulent and well-preserved chambers, searching for their companion. At another time, Bink would have admired the arrangements and tapestries of the rooms and halls at leisure, and been glad of the tight roof that had protected them from the rain and weathering and rot. But right now, his attention was preempted by concern. What had happened to Trent? If there were some monster lurking in this castle, summoning its victims by magic. Then they found a kind of upstairs library. Fat old books and coiled scrolls were filed on shelves along the walls. In the center, at a polished wood table, sat Trent, poring over an open tome. "Another peephole spell's got him," Bink cried. But Trent lifted his head. "No, merely the thirst for knowledge, Bink. This is fascinating." A bit abashed, they halted. "But the crash," Bink started. Trent smiled. "My fault. That old chair gave way under my weight." He pointed to a tangle of wood. "Much of the furniture here is fragile. I was so interested in this library that I was thoughtless." He rubbed his backside reminiscently. "I paid for it." "What's so fascinating about the books?" Chameleon asked. "This one is a history of this castle," Trent explained. "It is not, it seems, just another artifact. This is Castle Rugna." "Rugna?" Bink exclaimed. "The magician king of the fourth wave?" "The same. He ruled from here, it seems. When he died, and the fifth wave conquered Xanth 800 years ago, his castle was deserted and finally forgotten. But it was a remarkable structure. Much of the king's nature imbued the environs. The castle had an identity of its own." "I remember," Pink said. Rugna's talent was the conversion of magic to his own purposes, Trent said. A subtle but powerful asset. He was the ultimate tamer of the forces around him. He cultivated the magic trees around here, and he built this fine castle. During his reign, Xanth was in harmony with its populace. It was a kind of golden age. Yes, Fink agreed. I never thought I'd see this famous historical place. You may see more of it than you want to, Trent said. Remember how we were guided here? It seems like only yesterday, Fink said wryly. Why were we herded here? Chameleon demanded. Trent glanced at her, his gaze lingering. I believe this locale behooves you, Fanshin. Never mind that, she said. I'll be a lot prettier before I'm through, more's the pity. She's Chameleon, Fink said. She shifts from ugly to pretty and back again, and her intelligence varies inversely. She left Xanth to escape that curse. I would not regard that as a curse, the magician commented. All things to all men, in due course. You're not a woman, she snapped. I asked about this castle. Trent nodded. Well, this castle requires a new resident. A magician. It is very selective, which is one reason it has lain dormant for so many centuries. It wants to restore the years of its glory. Therefore, it must support a new King of Xanth. And you're a magician, Fink exclaimed. So when you came near, everything shoved you this way. So it would seem. There was no malign intent, merely an overwhelming need. A need for Castle Rugna, and a need for Xanth, to make this land again what it could be, a truly organized and excellent kingdom. But you're not king, Chameleon said. Not yet. There was a very positive quality to that statement. Bink and Chameleon looked at each other in developing comprehension. So, the evil magician had reverted to form, assuming he had ever changed his form. They discussed his human qualities, his seeming nobility, and had been deceived. He had planned to invade Xanth, and now... Not ever, she flared. The people would never tolerate a criminal like you. They haven't forgotten. So, you do have prior knowledge of my reputation, Trent said mildly. I had understood you to say you had not heard of me. He shrugged. However, the good citizens of Xanth may not have much choice, and it would not be the first time a criminal has occupied a throne. He continued calmly. With the powers of this castle, which are formidable, added to mine, I may not need an army. We'll stop you, Chameleon said grimly. Trent's gaze touched her again, appraisingly. Are you terminating the truce? That gave her pause. The end of the truce would put the two of them directly in Trent's power. If what he said about this castle was true. No, she said, but when it does end. There was no hint of malignancy in Trent's smile. Yes, it seems there will have to be a settlement. I had thought if I allowed you to go your way, you would extend the same courtesy to me. But when I said the people of Xanth would not necessarily have a choice, I did not mean it precisely the way you seem to have taken it. This castle may not permit us to do other than its will. For centuries, it has endured here, hanging on against inevitable deterioration, waiting for a magician of sufficient strength to qualify. Perhaps the magic sniffer we encountered in the forest was one of its representatives. Now, it has found not one, but two magicians. It will not lightly yield them up. From here, we may be bound to glory or extinction, depending on our decision. Two magicians? She asked. Remember, Bink has almost as much magic as I do. That was the verdict of the sniffer, and I am not certain it was mistaken. That would place him comfortably in the magician class. But I have no talent, Bink protested. Correction, Trent said. To have an unidentified talent is hardly synonymous with having no talent. But even if you are talentless, there is strong magic associated with you. You may be magic, as is Fanchin. Chameleon, she said. That's my real name. The others are merely phases. I beg your pardon, Trent said, making a little sitting bow to her. Chameleon. You mean I'll change somehow? Bink asked, half hopeful, half appalled. Perhaps. You might metamorphose into some superior form, like a pawn becoming a queen. He paused. Sorry, that's another mundane reference. I don't believe chess is known in Xanth. I have been too long in exile. Well, I still won't help you try to steal the crown, Bink said stoutly. Naturally not. Our purposes differ. We may even be rivals. I'm not trying to take over Xanth. Not consciously. But to prevent an evil magician from doing so, would you not consider... Ridiculous, Bink said, disgruntled. The notion was preposterous, yet insidious. If the only way to prevent Trent from... No. The time may indeed have come for us to part, Trent said. I have appreciated your company, but the situation seems to be changing. Perhaps you should attempt to leave this castle now. I shall not oppose you. Should we manage to separate, we can consider the truce abated. Fair enough? How nice, Chameleon said. You can relax over your books while the jungle tears us up. I do not think anything here will actually hurt you, Trent said. The theme of Castle Rugna is harmony with man. He smiled again. harmony, not harm. But I rather doubt you will be permitted to depart. Bink had had enough. I'll take my chances. Let's go. You want me to come along? Chameleon said hesitantly. Unless you prefer to stay with him. You might make a very pretty queen in a couple of weeks. Trent laughed. Chameleon moved with alacrity. They walked to the stairs, leaving the magician poring over his books again. Another ghost intercepted them. This one seemed larger than the others, more solid. Warning, it moaned. Bink stopped. You can speak? What is your warning? Doom beyond. Stay. Oh. Well, that's a chance we've already decided to take, Bink said, because we are loyal to Xanth. Xanth, the spirit repeated with a certain feeling. Yes, Xanth. So we must leave. The ghost seemed nonplussed. It faded. It almost seems they're on our side, Chameleon commented. Maybe they're trying to make us stay in the castle, though. We can't afford to trust ghosts, Bink agreed. They could not exit through the front gate, because the portcullis was firm, and they did not understand the mechanism for lifting it. They poked through the downstairs rooms, searching for an alternate exit. Bink found one promising door and slammed it shut as a host of leather-winged, long-toothed creatures stirred. They looked like vampire bats. He cracked the next one open more carefully, and a questing rope twined out, more than casually reminiscent of the tree vines. Maybe the cellar, Chameleon suggested, spying stairs leading down. They tried it, but at the foot, huge, baleful rats scurried into place, and they were facing, not fleeing, the intruders. The beasts looked too hungry, too confident. They surely had magic to trap any prey that entered their territory. Bink poked his staff at the nearest, experimentally. Scat! He exclaimed. But the rat leaped onto the pole, climbing up toward Bink's hands. He shook it, but the creature clung, and another jumped to the staff. He thunked it against the stone floor, hard. But still they hung on, and still they climbed. That must be their magic, the ability to cling. Bink! Above! Chameleon cried. There was a chittering overhead. More rats were crowding the beams, bracing themselves to leap. Bink threw the staff away and backed hastily up the stairs, holding on to Chameleon for support until he could get turned around. The rats did not follow. This castle is really organized, Bink said as they emerged on the main floor. I don't think it intends to let us go peacefully, but we've got to try. Maybe a window? But there were no windows on the ground floor. The outer wall had been built to withstand siege. No point in jumping from an upper turret. Someone would surely break a bone. They moved on and found themselves in the kitchen area. Here, there was a back exit, normally used for supplies, garbage, and servants. They slipped out and faced a small bridge across the moat, an ideal escape route. But There was motion on the bridge already. Snakes were emerging from the rotten planking. Not healthy, normal reptiles, but tattered, discolored things whose bones showed through oozing gaps in the sagging flesh. "Those are zombie snakes!" Chameleon cried with genuine horror. "Waked from the dead!" "It figures," Fink said grimly. "This whole castle is waked from the dead. Rats can thrive anywhere, but the other creatures died out when the castle died. Or maybe they came here to die even now. But zombies aren't as strong as real living things. We can probably handle them with our staves." But he had lost his own staff in the cellar. Now he smelled the stench of corruption, worse than that of the harpy. Waves of it rose from the festering snakes and the putrescent moat. Bink's stomach made an exploratory heave. He had seldom encountered genuine, far advanced decay. Usually either creatures were living, or their bones were fairly neat and clean. The stages in between, of spoilage and maggot infestation and disintegration, were a part of the cycle of life and death he had chosen not to inspect closely. Hitherto. "I don't want to try that bridge," Chameleon said. "We'll fall through, and there are zombie crocs in the water." So there were. Big reptiles threshing the slimy surface with leather-covered bones, their worm-eaten eyes gazing up. "Maybe a boat," Bink said. "Or a raft." Even if it weren't rotten and filled with zombie bugs, it would, well, look across the water. He looked. Now came the worst of all. Walking jerkily along the far bank of the moat. Human zombies. Some mummified, others hardly more than animate skeletons. Bink watched the awful things for a long moment, fascinated by their very grotesqueness. Fragments of wrappings and decayed flesh dropped from them. Some dribbled caked dirt left from their over-hasty emergence from their unquiet graves. It was a parade of putrefaction. He thought of fighting that motley army, hacking apart already destroyed bodies, feeling their rotting, vermin-riddled flesh on his hands, wrestling with those ghastly animations, saturated with the cloying stink of it all. What loathsome diseases did they bear? What gangrenous embraces would they bestow on him as they fell apart? What possible attack would make these moldering dead lie down again? The spell-driven things were closing in, coming across the ragged bridge. Surely, this was even worse for the zombies, for they could not voluntarily have roused themselves. They could not retire to the pleasant seclusion of the castle interior. To be pressed into service in this state, instead of remaining in the bliss of oblivion? "I don't think I'm ready to leave yet," Bink said. "No," Chameleon agreed, her face somewhat green. "Not this way." And the zombies halted, giving Bink and Chameleon time to re-enter Castle Rukna. And that ends Chapter 12. So, our intrepid adventurers have made it through the wilderness. with the evil magician and been captured by a castle. You know, it's fun when you live in a land where you can be captured by a castle. Where else can you find things like that? Cool. So hopefully you guys are enjoying. Gonna rest my voice for just a moment, and then we will start into the next chapter. Aw, yeah. Once again, hopefully you guys are enjoying a throwback to the youth of many of us with the reading of the Xanth series. After this one, I want to say the next book in the series is The Source of Magic. I want to say that. I don't know if I can say that, but I want to say that. And if that is true, then that'll be good. And we'll do that book next. Not tonight, obviously. We will do that one as the next book that we will read. Obviously. Well, you never know, Jeff. I mean, I I I like to, be very clear about some things because you know what they say, common sense is a very uncommon thing. I have found sometimes that when I don't spell something out, that some people will take things for granted that are not necessarily true. But, we find that we have fun. Arbet. Good evening, my friend. Good to see you lurking there on my YouTube channel. And yeah, I'll take this as an opportunity to remind everybody, while I am somewhat resting my voice for just a minute before I start into chapter 13, that if you have not, I would appreciate if you can head over to the YouTube channel and give a subscribe out there to the YouTube channel. All of the chapters that I have recorded for all of the books that I have done are out there on the YouTube channel. Oh, I've got something that I'm drinking. These Rehab Monster drinks are fantastic for soothing the voice. But I slept really poorly last night. I don't know what it is. Sometimes, my sleep does not go the way that I want it to. I went to bed right about midnight last night. Couldn't sleep until almost 3. I woke up about 4, couldn't get back to sleep. I managed to get about an hour of sleep a little bit later in the day, and then another hour at about 6, from like 5 to 6, and now I'm here. It's the medication and stuff that I'm on just really screws with my sleep schedule, and I don't know why it does it so badly. I won't see the neurologist to kind of talk about some of it until February, so I will deal with it at that time, but so be it. But yeah, guys, I was looking at in order to start getting monetized on YouTube, you have to have 500 subscribers. I want to say I'm at 71. So Anybody that would like to get out there at some point and help me to continue to grow that channel so eventually I can get monetized there as well, that would be great. One day. One day. I post up there plenty because I stream, on both sides now. Exactly. Thanks, Barbette. You're my hero. Um, because you people are awesome. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and we'll take the time now to get ourselves into chapter 13. Um, so if you happen to join us late, uh, Bink and Fanchon and the evil magician Trent have been captured by a castle. We found out that Fanchon is actually better known as Chameleon. Chameleon is has actually been in the book all along because she was Wayne, she was Dee, she was Fanchon, and her magic is that her beauty and her intelligence run in inverse to each other throughout the course of the month, along with her feminine cycles. This is one of those things that a lot of people have kind of an issue with this book. Is they call it a real, they say it's a real chauvinistic thing with this because it's got to be beautiful and stupid or smart and ugly. Um, couldn't be both. So on and so forth. Um, and so just take it for what it is. But basically her magic, she will get supremely, she'll get supremely beautiful, but, horribly, or horribly stupid at the same time. And then she'll swing to horribly ugly and, incredibly smart at the same time. And then, her stuff just swings back and forth throughout the course of the month. That was why she was trying to escape to Mundania, because the good magician Humphrey told her that she could go there, and eventually the magic would fade and she would settle into her normal. But now she's back in Xanth, and it will continue to fluctuate. Thank you, Barbette. So let's get into chapter 13. How many chapters do we have here? Yeah, okay, so we will do chapter 13 tonight, and then we have 3 more chapters left in the book, which we will probably finish next week. I'm on vacation next week, so if we go a little bit long, we start a little bit early, whatever it happens to be, we'll finish up the book next week. We'll do 2 chapters tonight, and then we'll do 3 next week. Oh yeah. And that way, after Thanksgiving, for those of you guys who live in the United States, we'll start the next book. All right, here we go. Chapter 13, Rationale. Chameleon was now well through her normal phase, which Bink had known before as D, and moving into her beauty phase. It was not identical to the prior Wayne. Her hair was lighter in color, and her features subtly different. Apparently, she varied in her physical details each cycle, never exactly repeating herself, but always proceeding from extreme to extreme. Unfortunately, she was also becoming less intelligent and was no help on the problem of escaping the castle. She was much more interested now in getting friendly with Bink, and this was a distraction he felt he could not afford at the moment. First, his priority was to get away from here. Second, he was not at all sure he wanted to associate himself in any permanent way with so changeable an entity. If only she were beautiful and bright. But no, that would not work either. He realized now why she had not been tempted by Trent's offer to make her beautiful when they were first captured outside the shield. That would merely have changed her phase. If she were beautiful when she was smart, she would be stupid when she was ugly. That was no improvement. She needed to be free of the curse entirely. And even if she could be fixed permanently at the height of both beauty and brains, he would not trust her, for he had been betrayed by that type too. Sabrina. He choked off that memory. Yet, even an ordinary girl could get pretty dull if she had no more than ordinary intelligence or magic. Castle Rugna, now that they were not actively opposing it, was a fairly pleasant residence. It did its best to make itself so. The surrounding gardens provided a rich plenitude of fruits, grains, vegetables, and small game. Trent practiced his archery by bringing down rabbits, shooting from the high embrasures, using one of the fine bows in the castle armory. Some of the creatures were false rabbits, projecting images of themselves a bit apart from their actual locations, causing him to waste arrows. But Trent seemed to enjoy the challenge. Once, he nabbed was a stinker, whose magic aroma was such that there was nothing to do but bury the carcass in a hurry, very deep. Another was a shrinker. As it died, it diminished in size until it was more like a mouse, hardly usable. Magic always had its little surprises, but some were good. The kitchen did need some attention, otherwise the zombies would come in to do the cooking. Rather than permit that, Chameleon took over. Assisted by advice from the lady ghosts, who were very particular about Castle Rugna cuisine, she made credible meals. She had no trouble with the dishes, since there was an everlasting magic fountain with aseptic properties. One rinse and everything sparkled. In fact, having a bath in that water was quite an experience. It effervesced. The interior partitions of the castle were as solid as the roof. There seemed to be weatherproofing spells in operation. Each person had an opulent private bedroom with costly draperies on the walls, moving rugs on the floors, quivering goose-down pillows, and solid silver chamber pots. They all lived like royalty. Bing discovered that the embroidered tapestry on the wall opposite his bed was actually a magic picture. The little figures moved, playing out their tiny dramas with intriguing detail. Miniature knights slew dragons, tiny ladies sewed, and in the supposed privacy of interior chambers, those knights and ladies embraced. At first, Bink closed his eyes to those scenes, but soon his natural voyeurism dominated, and he watched it all, and wished that he could, but no, that would not be proper, though he knew that Chameleon was willing. The ghosts were no problem. They even became familiar. Bink got to know them individually. One was the gatekeeper, who had looked in on them that first night when the portcullis crashed down. Another was the chambermaid. A third was the cook's assistant. There were 6 in all, each of whom had died inappropriately, and so lacked proper burial rites. They were shades, really, but without proper volition. Only the king of Xanth could absolve them, and they could not leave the castle. So they were doomed to serve here forever, unable to perform their accustomed chores. They were basically nice people who had no control over the castle itself, and constituted only an incidental part of its enchantment. They helped wherever they could, pitifully eager to please, telling Chameleon where to search for the new foods and telling Bink stories of their lives here in the grand old days. They'd been surprised and chagrined by the intrusion of living people at first, for they had been in isolation for centuries. But they realized it was part of the imperative of the castle itself, and now they'd adjusted. Trent spent most of his time in the library, as if seeking to master all of its accumulated knowledge. At first, Chameleon spent some time there too, interested in intellectual things. But, as she lost intelligence, she lost interest. Her researches changed. Now, she looked avidly for some spell to make her normal. When the library did not provide that, she left it to poke around the castle and grounds. So long as she was alone, no untoward things manifested. No rats, no carnivorous vines, no zombies. She was no prisoner here, only the men. She searched for sources of magic. She ate things freely, alarming Bink, who knew how poisonous magic could be. But she seemed to lead a charmed existence, charmed by Castle Rugna. One of her discoveries was serendipitous. A small red fruit growing plentifully on one of the garden trees. Chameleon tried to bite into one, but the rind was tough. So she took it to the kitchen to chop it in half with a cleaver. No ghosts were present. They generally appeared now only when they had business. Thus, Chameleon did not have warning about the nature of this fruit. She was careless and dropped one of the fruits on the floor. Bink heard the explosion and came running. Chameleon, quite pretty now, was huddling in a corner of the kitchen. "What happened?" Bink demanded, looking about for hostile magic. "Oh, Bink!" she cried, turning to him with woeful relief. Her homemade dress was in disarray, exposing her finely formed breasts above and her firm, round thighs below. What a difference a few days made! She was not at the height of her loveliness, but she was quite adequate to the need. The need? Bink found her in his arms, aware that she was eager to do any bidding he might make. It was difficult indeed to steel himself against the obvious, for she also had much of D in her, the aspect he had liked before he understood her nature. He could take her now, make love to her, and neither her stupid phase nor her smart phase would condemn him. But he was not a casual lover, and he did not want to make any such commitment at this time, in this situation. He pushed her away gently, the action requiring far more effort than he cared to show. "What happened?" he asked again. It banged," she said. He had to remind himself that her diminishing mentality was the other side of her curse. Now it was easier to hold off her lush body. A body without a mind did not appeal to him. What banged? "The cherry." The cherry? This was the first he had heard about the new fruit. But after patient questioning, he elicited the story. "Those are cherry bombs," he exclaimed comprehending. If you had actually eaten one... She was not yet so stupid as to misunderstand that. Oh, my mouth! Oh, your head! Those things are powerful. Didn't Millie warn you? Millie was the chambermaid ghost. She was busy. What would a ghost be busy with? Well, this was no time to explore that. After this, don't eat anything unless a ghost tells you it's okay. Chameleon nodded dutifully. Bink picked up a cherry cautiously and considered it. It was just a hard little red ball, marked only where its stem had broken off. Old magician Rugna probably used these bombs in warfare. He didn't like war as I understand it, but he never let his defenses grow soft. Any attackers? Why, one man on the ramparts with a slingshot could decimate an army, lobbing these cherry bombs down. No telling what other trees there are in the arsenal. If you don't stop fooling around with strange fruits, I could blow up the castle, she said, watching the dissipating smoke. The floor was scorched, and a table had lost a leg. Blow up the castle, Bink echoed, suddenly thinking of something. Chameleon, why don't you bring in some more cherry bombs? I'd like to experiment with them. But be careful. Very careful. Don't knock or drop any. Sure, she said, as eager to please as any ghost. Very careful. And don't eat any. That was not quite a joke. Bink gathered cloth and string and made bags of assorted sizes. Soon, he had bag bombs of varying power. He planted these strategically around the castle. One bag he kept for himself. I think we are ready to depart Castle Rugna, he said. But first, I have to talk with Trent. You stand here by the kitchen door, and if you see any zombies, throw cherries at them. He was sure no zombie had the coordination to catch such a bomb and throw it back. Wormy eyes and rotting flesh necessarily had poor hand-eye coordination, so they would be vulnerable. And if you see Trent come down, and not me, throw a cherry into that pile. Fast, before he gets within 6 feet of you. And he pointed to a large bomb he had tied to a major support column. Do you understand? She didn't, but he drilled her on it until she had it straight. She was to throw a cherry at anything she saw, except Bink himself. Now he was ready. He went up to the library to speak with the evil magician. His heart beat loudly within him, now that the moment of confrontation had come. But he knew what he had to do. A ghost intercepted him. It was Millie, the chambermaid, her white sheet arranged to resemble her working dress, her black hole eyes somehow having the aspect of once sultry humanity. The ghosts had become shapeless from sheer neglect and carelessness in the course of the past few centuries of isolation. But now that there was company, they were shaping up into their proper forms. Another week would have them back into people outlines and people colors. Though, of course, they would still be ghosts. Bink suspected Millie would turn out to be a rather pretty girl, and he wondered just how she had died. A liaison with a castle guest? Then a stabbing by the jealous wife who discovered them? "What is it, Millie?" he asked, pausing. He had minded the castle, but he bore no malice towards its unfortunate denizens. He hoped his bluff would be effective, so that it would not be necessary to destroy the home of the ghosts, who really were not responsible for its grandiose mischief. "The king, private conference," she said. Her speech was still somewhat windy, as it was hard for an entity with so little physical substance, hardly any ectoplasm, to enunciate clearly. But he could make it out. "Conference? There's nobody here but us," he objected. "Or do you mean he's on the pot?" Millie blushed as well as she was able to, though as chambermaid she had been accustomed to the chore of collecting and emptying out the chamber pots. She felt that any reference to a person's actual performance on them was uncouth. It was as if the substance were completely divorced from the function. Perhaps she liked to believe that the refuse appeared magically overnight, untouched by human intestine. Magic fertilizer. "No." "Well, I'm sorry, but I'll have to interrupt him," Fink said. "You see, I don't recognize him as king, and I am about to depart the castle." "Oh." She put one foggily formed hand to her vague face in feminine misgiving. "But see." Very well. Bink followed her to the little chapel room adjacent to the library. It was actually an offshoot from the master bedroom, with no direct access to the library. But it had, as it turned out, a small window opening onto the library. Since the gloom of the unlit chapel was deeper than that of the other room, it was possible to see without being seen. Trent was not alone. Before him stood a woman of early middle age, still handsome, though the first flush of beauty had faded. Her hair was tied back and up in a functional, fairly severe bun, but there were smile lines around her mouth and eyes. And beside her was a boy, perhaps 10 years old, who bore a direct resemblance to the woman, and had to be her son. Neither person spoke, but their breathing and slight shifts of posture showed that they were alive and solid, not ghosts. How had they come here? And what was their business? Why hadn't Bink or Chameleon seen them enter? It was almost impossible to approach this castle unobserved. It was designed that way, to be readily defensible in case of attack. And the portcullis remained down, blocking off the front entry. Bink had been down by the kitchen entrance, fashioning his bombs. But, granting that they obviously had come, why didn't they speak? Why didn't Trent speak? They all just looked at each other in eerie silence. This whole scene seemed to make no sense. Bink studied the odd, silent pair. They were vaguely reminiscent of the widow and son of Donald the Shade, the ones he had told about the Silver Oak, so that they would not have to live in poverty anymore. The similarity was not in their physical appearance, for these were better-looking people who had obviously not suffered poverty. It was in their atmosphere of quiet loss. Had they lost their man too, and come to Trent for some kind of help? If so, they had chosen the wrong magician. Bink drew away, disliking the feeling of snooping. Even evil magicians deserved some privacy. He walked around to the hall and back to the top of the stairs. Millie, her warning completed, vanished. Apparently, it required some effort for the ghosts to manifest and speak intelligibly, and they had to recuperate in whatever vacuum they occupied when off duty. He resumed his march to the library, this time stepping heavily so as to make his approach audible. Trent would have to introduce him to the visitors. But only the magician was there as Bink pushed open the door. He was seated at the table, poring over another tome. He looked up as Bink entered. "Come for a good book, Bink?" he inquired. Bink lost his composure. "The people. What happened to them?" Trent frowned. "People, Bink?" "I saw them. A boy and a woman. Right here." Bink faltered. "Look, I didn't mean to peek, but when Millie said you were in conference, I looked in from the chapel." Trent nodded. "Then you did see. I did not intend to burden you with my private problems." "Who are they? How did they get here? And what did you do to them?" "They were my wife and son," Trent said gravely. "They died." Bink remembered the story the sailor had told him of the evil magician's mundane family, killed by mundane illness. But they were here. I saw them. "And seeing is believing," Trent sighed. "Bink, they were two roaches, transformed into the likeness of my loved ones. These were the only two people I ever loved, or ever shall love. I miss them. I need them, if only to gaze on their likeness on occasion. When I lost them, there was nothing left for me in Mundania." He brought an embroidered Castle Rugna handkerchief to his face, and Bink was amazed to see that the evil magician's eyes were bright with tears. But Trent retained his control. "However, this is not properly your concern, and I prefer not to discuss it. What is it that brings you here, Bink?" Oh, yes. He was committed and had to follow through. Somehow, the verve had gone out of it, but he proceeded. "Chameleon and I are leaving Castle Rugna." The handsome brow wrinkled. "Again?" "This time, for real," Bink said, nettled. "The zombies won't stop us." "And you feel it necessary to inform me? We already have our understanding about this, and I am sure I would become aware of your absence in due course. If you feared I would oppose it, it would have been to your advantage to depart without my knowledge." Bink did not smile. "No. I feel it behooves me, under our truce, to inform you." Trent made a little wave of one hand. "Very well. I will not claim I am glad to see you go. I have come to appreciate your qualities, as shown in the precision of your ethic that caused you to notify me of your present action. And Chameleon is a fine girl, of like persuasion, and daily more pretty. I would much prefer to have you both on my side, but since this cannot be, I wish you every fortune elsewhere. Bink found this increasingly awkward. This is not exactly a social leave-taking. I'm sorry. He wished now he hadn't observed Trent's wife and son, or learned their identities. Those had obviously been good people, undeserving of their fate, and Bink was wholly in sympathy with the magician's grief. The castle won't let us go voluntarily. We have to force it. So we have planted bombs, and bombs? Trent exclaimed. Those are mundane artifacts. There are no bombs in Xanth, and shall be none. Never while I am king. It seems there were bombs in the old days, Bink said doggedly. There's a cherry bomb tree in the yard. Each cherry explodes on impact. Violently. Cherry bombs, Trent repeated. So, what have you done with the cherries? We have used them to mine the castle supports. If Rugna tries to stop us, we will destroy it. So it is better if it lets us go in peace. I needed to tell you so you could disarm the bombs after we're gone. Why tell me this? Don't you oppose my designs? And those of Castle Rugna? If Magician and Castle were destroyed, you would be the clean victor. Not clean. It's not the kind of victory I want, Bink said. Look, you could do so much good in Xanth. If you only... But he knew it was useless. It simply was not the nature of an evil magician to devote himself to good. Here is a list of the bomb locations, he said, setting a piece of paper on the table. All you have to do is pick up the packages and bags very carefully and take them outside. Trent shook his head. I don't believe your bomb threat will work to affect your escape, Bink. The castle is not intelligent per se. It only reacts to certain stimuli. It might let Chameleon go, but not you. In its perception, you are a magician. Therefore, you must remain. You may have outthought Rugna, but it will not comprehend the full nature of your ploy. Thus, the zombies will balk you, as before. Then, we shall have to bomb it. Exactly. You will have to set off the cherries, and all of us will be destroyed together. No. We'll get outside first and heave a cherry back. If the castle cannot be bluffed, it can't be bluffed. It is not a thinking thing. It merely reacts. You will be forced to destroy it, and you know I can't permit that. I need Rugna. Now, it was getting tough. Bink was ready. Chameleon will set off the bombs if you transform me. he said, feeling the chill of challenge. He didn't like this sort of power play, but had known it would come to this. If you interfere in any way, oh, I would not break the truce, but you can't break the truce. Either I rejoin Chameleon alone, or she heaves a cherry into a bomb. She's too stupid to do anything but follow directions. Listen to me, Bink. It is my given word that prevents me from breaking the truce, not your tactical preparations. I could transform you into a flea, and then transform a roach into your likeness, and send that likeness down to meet Chameleon. Once she set down the cherry... Bink's face reflected his chagrin. The evil magician could void the plan. Chameleon, stupid, would not catch on until too late. That nadir of intelligence worked against him as well as for him. I am not doing this, Trent said. I tell you about the possibility merely to demonstrate that I, too, have ethics. The end does not justify the means. I feel that you have allowed yourself to forget this temporarily, and if you will not listen a moment, or if you will listen a moment, you will see your error and correct it. I cannot allow you to destroy this marvelous and historically significant edifice to no point. Already Bink was feeling guilty. Was he to be talked out of a course he knew was right? Surely you realize, the evil magician continued persuasively, that the entire area would erupt in vengeful wrath if you did this thing. You might be outside the castle, but you would remain in the Rugna environs, and you would die horribly. Chameleon, too. Chameleon, too. That hurt. That beautiful girl devoured by a tangle tree, ripped apart by zombies. It is a risk I must take, Bink said grimly, though he realized the magician was correct. The way they had been herded to this castle, there would be no escaping the savagery of the forest. Maybe you will be able to persuade the castle to let us go, rather than set off that chain of events. You are a stubborn one. Yes? At least hear me out first. If I cannot persuade you, then what must be, though I abhor it. Speak briefly. Bink was surprised at his own temerity, but he felt he was doing what he had to. If Trent tried to approach within 6 feet, Bink would take off to avoid transformation. He might be able to outrun the magician, but even so, he could not wait too long. He was afraid that Chameleon would tire of waiting and do something foolish. I really don't want to see you or Chameleon die. And of course, I value my own survival, Trent said. While I love nobody alive today, you two have been as close to me as anyone. It is almost as if fate has decreed that, like types, must be banned from the conventional society of Xanth. We... Like types? Bink exclaimed indignantly. I apologize for an invidious comparison. We have been through a great deal together in a short time, and I think it is fair to say we have saved each other's lives on occasion. Perhaps it was to associate with your like that I really returned to Xanth. Maybe so, Bink said stiffly, suppressing the mixed feelings he was experiencing. But that does not justify your conquering Xanth and probably killing many entire families. Trent looked pained, but controlled himself. I do not pretend that it does, Bink. The mundane tragedy of my family was the stimulus, not the justification for my return. I had nothing remaining in Mundania worth living for, so naturally my orientation shifted to Xanth, my homeland. I would not try to harm Xanth. I hope to benefit it by opening it up to the contemporary reality before it is too late. Even if some deaths occur, this is a small price to pay for the eventual salvation of Xanth. You think Xanth won't survive unless you conquer it? Bing tried to put a sneer in his tone, but it didn't register very well. If only he had the verbal control and projection of the evil magician. Yes, actually I do. Xanth is overdue for a new wave of colonization, and such a wave would benefit it as the prior ones did. The waves were murder and rapine and destruction. The curse of Xanth. Trent shook his head. Some were that, yes, but others were highly beneficial, such as the fourth wave, from which this castle dates. It was not the fact of the waves, but their mismanagement that made trouble. On the whole, they were essential to the progress of Xanth. But I don't expect you to believe that. Right now, I'm merely trying to persuade you to spare this castle and yourself. I'm not trying to convert you to my cause. Something about this interchange was troubling Bink increasingly. The evil magician seemed too mature, too reasonable, too knowledgeable, too committed. Trent was wrong. He had to be. Yet he spoke with such verisimilitude that Bink had difficulty pinpointing the wrongness. Try to convert me, he said. I'm glad you said that, Bink. I'd like you to know my logical rationale. Perhaps you can offer some positive critique. That sounded like a sophisticated intellectual ploy. Bink tried to perceive it as sarcasm, but he was sure it was not. He feared the magician was more intelligent than he, but he also knew what was right. Maybe I can, he said guardedly. He felt as if he were walking into the wilderness, picking the most likely paths, yet being inevitably guided to the trap at the center. Castle Rugna on the physical and intellectual levels. Rugna had lacked a voice for 800 years, but now it had one. Bink could no more fence with that voice than he could with the magician's keen sword, yet he had to try. My rationale is dual. Part of it relates to Mundania, part to Xanth. You see, despite certain lapses in ethics and politics, Mundania has progressed remarkably in the past few centuries. thanks to the numbers of people who have made discoveries and spread information. In many respects, it is a far more civilized region than Xanth. Unfortunately, the mundane's powers of combat have also progressed. This you will have to take on faith, for I have no way to prove it here. Mundania has weapons that are easily capable of eradicating all life in Xanth, regardless of the shield. That's a lie, Pink exclaimed. Nothing can penetrate the shield. Except perhaps the three of us, Trent murmured. But the main restriction of the shield is against living things. You could charge through the shield. Your body would penetrate it quite readily, but you would be dead when you got there. Same thing. Not the same thing, Bink. You see, there are big guns that throw missiles which are dead to begin with, such as powerful bombs, like your cherry bombs, but much worse, preset to explode on contact. Xanth is a small area compared to Mundania. If the Mundanes were determined, they could saturate Xanth. In such an attack, even the shield stone would be destroyed. The people of Xanth can no longer afford to ignore the Mundanes. There are too many Mundanians. We can't remain undiscovered forever. They can and will one day wipe us out, unless we establish relations now. Bink shook his head in disbelief and incomprehension. But Trent continued without rancor. Now, the Xanth internal aspect is quite another matter. It poses no threat to Mundania, since magic is not operative there. But it does pose an insidious but compelling threat to life as we know it in Xanth itself. Xanth poses a threat to Xanth? This is nonsense on the face of it. Now Trent's smile was a bit patronizing. I can see you would have had trouble with logic of recent Mundanian science. But he sobered before Bink could inquire about that. No, I am being unfair to you. This internal threat of Xanth is something I learned just in the past few days from my researches in this library, and it is important. This aspect alone justifies the necessity of preserving this castle, for its accumulated ancient lore is vital to Xanth society. Bink remained dubious. We've lived without this library for 8 centuries. We can live without it now. Ah, but the manner of that life. Trent shook his head as if perceiving something too vast to be expressed. He got up and moved to a shelf behind him. He took down a book and rifled carefully through its creaking old pages. He set it down before Bink, open. What is that picture? A dragon, Bink said promptly. Trent flipped a page. And this? A manticora. What was the point? The pictures were very nice, though they did not concede precisely with contemporary creatures. The proportions and details were subtly wrong. And this. It was a picture of a human-headed quadruped with hooves, a horse's tail, and cat-like forelegs. A lamia. And this. A centaur. Look, we can admire pictures all day, but what do these creatures have in common? Trent asked. They have human heads or foreparts, except the dragon, though the one in this book has an almost human shortness of snout. Some have human intelligence, but exactly. Consider the sequence. Trace a dragon back through similar species, and it becomes increasingly manlike. Does that suggest anything to you? Just that some creatures are more manlike than others? But that's no threat to Xanth. Anyway, most of these pictures are out of date. The actual creatures don't look quite like that anymore. Did the centaurs teach you the theory of evolution? Oh, sure. That today's creatures are evolved from more primitive ones, selected for survival. Go back far enough and you find a common ancestor. Right. But in Mundania, creatures like the lamia, manticore, and dragon never evolved. Of course not. They're magic. They evolve by magic selection. Only in Xanth can. Yet, obviously, Xanth creatures started from mundane ancestors. They have so many affinities. All right, Bink said impatiently. They descended from mundanes. What has that got to do with your conquering Xanth? According to conventional centaur history, man has been in Xanth only 1,000 years, Trent said. In that period, there have been 10 major waves of immigration from Mundania. 12, Bink said. That depends on how you count them. At any rate, this continued for 900 years, until the Shield cut off those migrations. Yet there are many partially human forms that predate the supposed arrival of human beings. Does that seem to be significant? Bink was increasingly worried that Chameleon would foul up or that the castle would figure out a way to neutralize the cherry bombs. He was not certain that Castle Rugna could not think for itself. Was the evil magician stalling to make time for this? I'll give you one more minute to make your case. Then we're going, regardless. How could partially human forms have evolved unless they had human ancestors? Convergent evolution doesn't create the unnatural mishmash monsters we have here. It creates creatures adapted to fit their ecological niches, and human features fit few niches. There had to have been people in Xanth many thousands of years ago. All right, Pink agreed. 30 seconds. Those people must have interbred with animals to form the composites we know. The centaurs, manticoras, merfolk, harpies, and all. And the creatures crossbred among themselves. And the composites interbred with other composites, producing things like the chimera. Bing turned to go. I think your minute is up, he said. Then he froze. They what? The species mated with other species to create hybrids. Man-headed beasts, beast-headed men. Impossible. Men can only mate with men. I mean with women. It would be unnatural to. Xanth is an unnatural land, Bink. Magic makes remarkable things possible. Bink saw that logic defied emotion. But even if it did, he said with difficulty, that still doesn't justify your conquering Xanth. What's past is past. A change of government won't. I think this background does justify my assumption of power, Bink. Because the accelerated evolution and mutation produced by magic and interspecies miscegenation is changing Xanth. If we remain cut off from the mundane world, there will, in time, be no human beings left, only crossbreeds. Only the constant influx of pure stock in the last millennium has enabled man to maintain his type. And there really are not too many human beings here now. Our population is diminishing, not through famine, disease, or war, but through the attrition of crossbreeding. When a man mates with a harpy, the result is not a man-child. No, Bink cried, horrified. No one would breed with a filthy harpy. Filthy harpy? Perhaps not. But how about a clean, pretty harpy? Trent inquired with a lift of his eyebrows. They aren't all alike, you know. You see only their outcasts, not their fresh, young. No! Suppose he had drunk from a love spring, accidentally, and the next to drink there was a harpy. No, Bink knew better. A love spell provided an overriding compulsion. He remembered his experience with the love spring by the chasm, from which he had almost drunk, before seeing the griffin and the unicorn in their embrace. There had been a harpy there. He shuddered reminiscently. Have you ever been tempted by an attractive mermaid? Or a lady centaur? Trent persisted. No. But an insidious memory picture of the elegant, firm mermaid breasts came to him. And Cherie, the centaur who had given him a lift during the first leg of his journey to see the magician Humphrey. When he touched her, had it really been accidental? She had threatened to drop him in a trench, but she hadn't been serious. She was a very nice filly. Person. Honesty compelled his reluctant correction. Maybe. And surely there were others, less scrupulous than you. Trent continued inexorably. They might indulge in certain circumstances, might they not? Just for variety. Don't the boys of your village hang around the centaur grounds on the sly, as they did in my day? Boys like Zinc, Jama, and Portifer, bullies and troublemakers, who had caused ire in the centaur camp. Bink remembered that too. He had missed the significance before. Of course they had gone to see the bare-breasted centaur fillies. And if they caught one alone... Bink knew his face was red. What are you getting at? He demanded, trying to cover his embarrassment. Just this. Xanth must have had intercourse with. Sorry, bad word. Must have had contact with Mundania long before the date of our earliest records. before the waves, because only in Mundania is the human species pure. From the time a man sets foot in Xanth, he begins to change. He develops magic, and his children develop more magic, until some of them become full-fledged magicians. And if they remain, they inevitably become magic themselves, or their descendants do, either by breaking down the natural barriers between species, or by evolving into imps, elves, goblins, giants, trolls. Did you get a good look at Humphrey? He's a gnome, Pink said without thinking. Then, oh no, he's a man, and a good one. But he's well along the route to something else. He's at the height of his magical powers now, but his children, if he ever has any, may be true gnomes. I dare say he knows this, which is why he won't marry. And consider Chameleon. She has no direct magic, because she has become magic. This is the way the entire human populace of Xanth will go, inevitably, unless there is a steady infusion of new blood from Mundania. The shield must come down. The magic creatures of Xanth must be permitted to migrate outside, freely, there to revert slowly and naturally to their original species. New animals must come in. But Bink found himself fumbling with the horrors of these concepts. If there was always an interchange before, what happened to the people who came thousands of years ago? Probably there was some obstruction for a while, cutting off migration. Xanth could have been a true island for 1,000 years or so, trapping the original prehistoric human settlers, so that they merged entirely with the existing forms and gave rise to the centaurs and other sports. It is happening again under the shield. Human beings must. Enough, Bink whispered, fundamentally shocked. I can't listen to any more. You will defuse the cherry bombs? Like a bolt of lightning, sanity returned. No. I'm taking Chameleon and leaving. Now. But you have to understand. No. Evil magician was beginning to make sense. If Bink listened any more, he would be subverted, and Xanth would be lost. What you suggest is an abomination. It cannot be true. I cannot accept it. Trent sighed, with seemingly genuine regret. Well, it was worth a try, though I did fear you would reject it. I still cannot permit you to destroy this castle. Bink braced himself to move, to get out of transformation range. 6 feet. Trent shook his head. No need to flee, Bink. I shall not break the truce. I could have done that when I showed you the pictures, but I value my given word. So I must compromise. If you will not join me, I shall have to join you. What? Bink, whose ears were almost closed to the evil magician's beguiling logic, was caught off guard. Spare Castle, Rukna. Defuse the bombs. I will see you safely clear of these environs. This was too easy. Your word? My word, Trent said solemnly. You can make the castle let us go. Yes. This is another facet of what I have learned in these archives. I have only to speak the proper words to it, and it will even facilitate our departure. Your word, Bink repeated suspiciously. So far, Trent had not broken it. Yet what guarantee was there? No tricks, no sudden change of mind. My word of honor, Bink. What could he do? If the magician wanted to break the truce, he could transform Bink into a tadpole now, then sneak up on Chameleon and transform her. And Bink was inclined to trust him. All right. Go and defuse your bombs. I will settle with Rugna. Bink went. Chameleon met him with a glad little cry, and this time he was quite satisfied to accept her embrace. Trent has agreed to get us out of here, he told her. Oh, Bink, I'm so glad, she exclaimed, kissing him. He had to grab her hand to make sure she didn't drop the cherry bomb she still held. She was growing lovelier by the hour. Her personality was not changing much, except as her diminishing intelligence caused her to be less complex, less suspicious. He liked that personality, and now he had to admit he liked her beauty too. She was of Xanth. She was magic. She did not try to manipulate him for her private purposes. She was his type of girl. But he knew that her stupidity would turn him off, just as her ugliness during the other phase had. He could live with neither a lovely moron nor an ugly genius. She was attractive only right now, while her intelligence was fresh in his memory, and her beauty was manifest to his sight and touch. To believe otherwise would be folly. He drew away from her. We have to remove the bombs. Carefully, he said. But what about the emotional bombs within him? And that ends chapter 13. And also ends our stream for this evening. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed chapters 12 and 13, where we got to see Castle Rugna. We got to learn who Chameleon actually was. We got to hear them actually say, "A spell for Chameleon." They had the title of the book in the book. Oh my God, oh my God. And next week, we will plan to finish out the book with chapters 14, 15, and 16. And be good from there. Looking ahead to the rest of this week, tomorrow is our Pathfinder Kingmaker game. So you can stop by to check that out if you so desire. Of course, it will be up on my YouTube and my Twitch pages. And then Thursday, I want to say I have an advisory board meeting ahead of Thanksgiving. But I should be back for an 8 o'clock start time. I'm pretty much always back by 8 o'clock from those. For my Project New Hope advisory board meetings. So I should be here for Stompy Mech Night on Thursday. We'll plan to open all the loot bags that I have gotten and just have a good Stompy Mech night. And there we go. Thank you to all of you. The greatest gift that you can give to a streamer is a gift of your time. And I appreciate that you guys gave me the gift of yours this evening, whether it was for 5 minutes or for 3 hours. Appreciate so much you guys being here. A reminder to please stop out to the YouTube channel, and if you have not done so already, drop a subscribe there for that YouTube channel. Help me to grow that venue. Tell your friends. Tell your colleagues. Tell your friends' colleagues. Tell your colleagues' friends. Tell everybody. Have them come subscribe. Give a like to those videos out there. I will have these 2 chapters posted up on the YouTube channel by a little bit later this evening. So if you missed any of them, or you've missed any of them whatsoever in A Spell for Chameleon, you can go check them out there on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@SirArminius. I hope you guys all have yourselves a wonderful evening. I will see you guys all again very soon. Good night, all, and see you soon.